The air inside the sanctuary was heavy not from incense or reverence, but from the tension of rehearsed morality. Soft organ music hummed in the background, but its sweetness was drowned out by something unsaid, something seen but never addressed. Pastor Bradley Mason's voice, deep and performative, rose above the pews as he paced across the gleaming stage. The lights were too bright, as if God himself had signed off on this theatrical production. "Purity is not weakness, it's obedience," he proclaimed, jabbing a finger toward the balcony where the few scattered Black and Hispanic attendees sat as if subconsciously corralled. A burst of applause followed, primarily from the lower aisles. Jonathan Roumie remained seated off to the side, his expression unreadable. His role tonight was simple: end the service with a prayer and a few words about faith. That's what he'd been invited to do. But what he had witnessed since stepping into this place made his hands tremble slightly beneath the wooden pew. He had flown in from Los Angeles 2 days prior, reluctant but obedient to the calling or the challenge he couldn't yet name. He had seen the media blitz surrounding Pastor Mason, the interviews, the firebrand theology cloaked in nationalism. But something about the invitation haunted him. In his hotel room the night before, he had a dream. It wasn't a vision of clouds, or harps or trumpets. It was a hallway, endless, white walls. And at the far end stood a figure, not the actor version he played, not the gentle smiles he'd memorized, but Jesus. Real, silent. His eyes were not accusing, just exhausted. Jonathan approached in the dream, barefoot and uncertain, and asked, with childlike fear, "Am I going to heaven?" Jesus didn't speak. Instead, he turned away and began to weep. That image clung to Jonathan's ribs like ice. Now, seated in the echoing silence between sermons, Jonathan watched a Black teenage boy, maybe 15, being escorted out by a deacon. The boy's shoulders were slumped, eyes red. He wasn't disruptive. His only offense was his hoodie, adorned with the face of George Floyd and the words, "I can't breathe." The usher whispered something as they exited. Jonathan didn't catch it, but the shame on the boy's face was unmistakable. Minutes later, the door closed behind them with a softness that screamed louder than any sermon. Jonathan rose during intermission and stepped outside. Cold wind licked his face. A line of silent protesters stood at the curb, holding candles and placards. Their eyes met his but said nothing. An older woman, cloaked in a grey shawl, stepped forward and handed him a photo. A young man, Black, eyes kind, smile bright. Written in marker, Darren, 1999 to 2022. Faithful forgotten. He returned inside. The final applause of the sermon shook the walls. Pastor Mason stood, arms spread, declaring, "We reject the lies of the world. We stand on truth." Another ovation. Jonathan didn't clap. Instead, he opened his notebook. He turned to the final page and wrote slowly, "I asked Jesus last night if I was going to heaven, and his answer left me shaking." Then he underlined it. A few moments later, Mason called his name. "Brother Jonathan, would you bless us with a word of encouragement tonight?" The spotlight swung onto him. He rose. He was still trembling, but not with fear, with purpose. Weeks before the invitation arrived, Jonathan had already heard whispers about Mason's church. The glowing reputation came wrapped in controversy. A Black worship leader had quietly resigned. A Hispanic custodian had filed a complaint, dismissed within days. No outrage, no consequence. The rot was well dressed. The emails from former congregants painted a pattern: racial profiling, microaggressions passed as policies, apologies never offered. Jonathan didn't respond immediately. He prayed instead. He waited. In Los Angeles, he met Leona, a soft-spoken woman who once attended Mason's church. Her teenage son, Elijah, had written a letter to the pastor after being scolded for wearing cornrows. "Does Jesus care how my hair looks?" he had written. The letter was never acknowledged. Jonathan asked Leona if he could see the letter. She retrieved it from a shoebox lined with other unmailed grievances. It was simple, handwritten, ending with, "If I don't belong at church, do I still belong to God?" Jonathan cried after reading it. Backstage before the final service, he overheard two deacons talking. "That boy shouldn't have worn that hoodie," one muttered. "Makes people uncomfortable. Uncomfortable truth doesn't belong in God's house," the other agreed. The phrase struck Jonathan like a stone. Truth uncomfortable banished. He remembered the dream. Jesus crying, not at sin, but at silence. The next morning, he walked through the church's private corridor. On the walls were framed photos, Mason with senators, celebrities, even sports icons. Each picture smiled. Each caption declared, faith, leadership, legacy. Jonathan stopped at one photo in particular, Mason shaking hands with a police officer who had been acquitted after shooting an unarmed black teen in 2016. The caption, standing with justice. He stared at it for minutes. Jonathan didn't decline the speaking offer. He accepted it, not to speak for applause, but to echo a silence that had gone unchallenged. The night before, he rehearsed nothing. Instead, he knelt beside his hotel bed and whispered, "If I fall, let it be into truth." He stood now on stage, under lights too bright. The room waited. Thousands of eyes. Mason smiled from his golden pulpit chair. The live stream light blinked red. Jonathan opened his notebook. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Last night, I asked Jesus if I was going to heaven." Silence. He didn't answer. He wept. A ripple moved through the congregation. He flipped the page. "I came here to speak about faith, but I can't speak about God without speaking about His children." He looked toward the back rows. "The ones we overlook, the ones we remove." He read Elijah's letter. Leona was seated somewhere in the crowd. She wept. He spoke about Darren, whose mother gave him the photo. He projected their stories on the large screen behind him. Names, faces, years. The screen that once showed scriptures now showed scars. He said their names. He let the silence breathe after each one. Mason interrupted, voice sharp. "This isn't your platform, brother. You were invited to speak on faith." Jonathan faced him, calm. "And what is faith if it overlooks the crucified?" He turned back to the audience. "There are sins we shout against from this pulpit, but what about the sins we kneel to?" Another ripple. Some gasped. Others shifted uncomfortably. "I am not accusing. I am revealing." He showed the complaints, the silent resignations, the ignored letters. One by one, Mason stood furious. "This is blasphemy." Jonathan closed his notebook. "No, this is confession." The room didn't erupt. It dissolved. A quiet, slow unraveling. People looked at each other unsure. Jonathan walked off stage, past Mason, past the bright lights, into the night air again. The candle-holding line of protesters still stood. He joined them. For the first time, he didn't stand apart. He stood among Dot. In the days that followed, the video went viral. 10 million views. 20 headlines flooded in. Actor exposes megachurch racism, but Jonathan gave no interviews. He returned to LA, resuming quiet life. Mason, meanwhile, scrambled. The church lost donors. A formal investigation was launched. His public statements felt hollow. "I was taken out of context," he said. "He hijacked my platform, but no one listened." In his empty office, Mason watched Jonathan's video again. He paused at the moment Jonathan said, "If this is your version of heaven, then Jesus won't be there." He stared at it. In her home, Leona watched the same video with Elijah. The boy smiled. In a small neighborhood church, Jonathan sat in the back row. No stage, no applause, just people worshipping, fully seen. He stepped outside and recorded a short message. "Heaven's not built by walls. It's opened by wounds." He said no more. He didn't need to. He had asked Jesus a question. And through the silence, through the tears, through the fire, he had received his answer, and so had everyone else.